Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Perfect. Hi. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you for being here. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Gunther. We appreciate this.
You're very welcome.
Yes, I guess I'm here with the man who doesn't need no introduction. I'm here with none other than Gunther Fehlinger, the great dismantler. And as Nate has already written you, we are going to ask you 2 to 6 questions. And if there's time afterwards, we're going to let the audience ask some questions in return to your answers. Is that fine with you?
Absolutely.
Perfect. So let's get straight to it. So you recently rose to a great Twitter notoriety, mostly for calling for the dismantling of the BRICS states. And well, what do you think? Does the other challenges that the West has to face to bring this about, this great dismantling of basically 42% of the global population? It sounds like no small feat.
My first priority is the dismantling of Russia. Russia is a hostile state which has attacked Ukraine, and therefore, I think the legitimacy of Russia to be recognized as a sovereign state is very limited. And I think there's a lot of centrifugal powers and forces in Russia, anyhow. So that's my most overriding priority to support and advocate for the dismantlement and dissolution of Russia, similar like it was in Yugoslavia in the 90s or the ex-Soviet Union. And that's why I call for ex-Russia.
Yes, all right. Do you believe
On the
the?
other
Hmm?
on the other side, if you want me to continue, the BRICS countries, I made the tour for the BRICS countries like Brazil, India, and others, and South Africa, because I was shocked by their moral neutrality and by them hanging out with Russia during this genocidal war. And then, after the BRICS summit in August, I decided to discuss all their fragilities and to discuss how it would be if we would discuss the dismantlement of India, Brazil, and South Africa. And I found out there is a lot of injustice in these countries, and a lot of people would be very happy to discuss that. And therefore, I'm quite happy to have a debate, which I don't think, the ultimate aim is not the dismantlement, but the federalization of Brazil, of India, and better living conditions of the people there. And the countries which are really need to be broken up, and this should be our Western, and everybody should have this as a war game as well, is Russia, Iran, China, and Syria. And these are the four openly hostile states to us, and they are supplying, of course, Russia with weapons, and they are supporting Russia during this war. So these are the real hostile quad which we have to focus. But the rest of the world, who is morally neutral, needs also to be a little bit in the defensive, because it's absolutely unacceptable what they are doing, and that's why I started this campaign.
All right, very good. I believe I will only ask you the next question. Those were the two most important ones because we already have some big accounts on here who would like to talk to you too. Um, so I believe that in Austria there is this certain sentiment of anti-Americanism that is felt, and it seems as like a very conservative country, almost like a relic of the past or frozen in time. And how would you personally explain this Austrian anti-Americanism, and what do you think will the consequences be if Austria doesn't join the NATO and if it continues to hesitate on full Western integration?
Yeah, that's a tragedy. I think the reason for it is connected with all the prejudices which still come from the World War II and from this kind of anti-Semite, kind of Western feeling, which still is very strong in Austria, unfortunately. And we were contrary to Western Germany, who had really to confront its inner devils, and was also re-educated much more actively by the Americans after World War II. We were somehow let off the hook, and we somehow kept all our prejudices. Yeah. And so when you see this amount of conspiracy theory, which is in the Austrian media, but also in the Austrian elite, yeah, this kind of reluctance to buy American gas and stick to Russian gas, yeah, and the justifications behind it, yeah, and this idea to somehow balancing between East and West, and we are the neutral moral superstars of the world because we are somehow in between. And that is absolutely the problem in Austria. And I think it will not change. But the international pressure on Austria will be much higher to be a more decent European member, because the patience of countries like Poland, Estland, and even Germany and Italy with this Austrian special way is, I think, very limited. Yeah. And we have isolated us ever more. And our last ally in Austria, meaning the Austrian government, is in reality Orban and Hungary. And so we will be confronted more and more throughout 2024. And ultimately, I will also lead the debate towards the EU joining NATO. And then the question will be, can Austria, in this kind of Switzerland scenario, be really staying in the European Union? And we are heading for a big crisis on the question of our Western integration. And I hope it will be resolved by in NATO membership and us staying in the EU. But that's no longer so sure. And we will see if we also completely glide into the Orban camp, or there is some kind of wake-up call towards the West, which I strongly support. And I hope that we will join NATO in 2024. And that would be the logic of our EU membership. And so I'm advocating for that. And if there are some Austrians in the audience, please sign my people's petition. I would be very happy for more signatures. It's online, and that would be fantastic. Thanks a lot.
Perfect. All right, Nate, do you think we should hand the mic over to Spergler? He's requesting to speak, or should I finish the other questions first?
I think we can start with that, and then we can get into the further questions that we have. So yeah, I'll let Spergler up right now.
Perfect.
Spergler, you're on. Let's hear it.
Yes. Thank you for having me, Gunther. Very good to see you. I recently visited Serbia, and you're quite the celebrity over there. Perhaps you're a bit infamous over there, I should say. But I just want to ask you if you think that like Westphalian sovereignty as a concept, is it dead?
Thanks a lot for the question. You know, celebrity, I care very much for Serbia. I work since 30 years. Since 92, I was the first time in Serbia to support the opposition. And it's one of the big tragedies that Europe has not cared enough for Serbia, and Russia cares very much for Serbia. The amount of money flowing into Serbia in the last 30 years, and the effort politically they have made to keep Serbia a Russian bridgehead in the last 30 years, has been enormous. And that is a big tragedy. And we are heading for another big confrontation with Russian Serbia, and I'm very sorry about it. I know some Russian and Serbian propaganda outlet like to portray me as the new Hötzendorf, which is calling for war, but I'm not. Yeah, in reality, I want to deter another military escalation, because it will be very, very brutal. And obviously, Serbia will be the complete loser of any such a confrontation, because we are so advanced and we are so strong as NATO. As we see now in the case of Ukraine, we are so powerful, and Serbia is so far away from anything like close to Yugoslavian strength. So it would be a complete tragedy for them to test this in a military confrontation, but they have mobilized now. And so I hope it will stay calm. I call Serbia also to join NATO, the EU, and to recognize Kosovo. This is the way for peace, and I hope this will be done. When it comes to the Westphalian question, you know, I'm not Mr. Kissinger. I'm not the biggest political theorist, yeah, but I want to make very nice my theory here about the so-called, I have termed it myself, the Fehlinger doctrine. And ultimately it says, you know, yes to sovereign states. Yeah, absolutely. But it can be much more of them. The age of empire is over, not the age of the Westphalian peace. So what we need, yeah, is to have a little bit of more flexibility when it comes to new states, as we had in the case of Austria and Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire, the French Empire, the Spanish Empire, the whatever Portuguese Empire, and more recently the Soviet Empire and the Yugoslav Serbian Empire. And all these empires have disintegrated, and there's now many more states, and most of them are very good. Yeah? So we have, unfortunately, after the fall of the Yugoslavia in the 90s, somehow drawn a very negative kind of conclusion that this is Balkanization and it has to be rejected. Yeah? And so the West has not supported disintegration of Iraq, Libya, Syria, and is not supporting disintegration now of Russia. While all these countries are really very not working countries, yeah, and the population there really doesn't like to live in one country together. And then the question is, if they really don't want to live together, and if Russia is bombing Chechnya, and introducing a terror regime of Kadyrov in Chechnya afterwards, yeah, and this is outrageous situation there. Why don't we say, oh, the world would be much better with independent Chechnya, or with independent Western Libya or Eastern Libya, or independent Buratia, where the Buratians now have to die. So I say Westphalian system, absolutely good. Obviously, in the 21st century, it has to be assisted with a kind of regional integration system. So I'm not in favor of very, very small countries being all very much hostile to each other, but I'm for regional integration. So Westphalian system, meaning sovereign states in the Vienna Congress, who is not so much into that debate, that's very good, but it always has to be assisted with a regional integration system like the European Union, like the Association for Southeast Asian States, like the American States Association, like the African Union, which actually works much better, surprisingly, the last years. And also, we need one association for the Middle East and for the ex-Russian states. I have termed it the Association of Northwestern Asian States. And that's basically what we also need to develop. And we need to empower these regional associations then to be also represented on the global level. That's why I'm always calling for the European Union to sit in the UN Security Council, not France, the EU. And that's the logic. And also ASEAN should sit there in the UN Security Council, also the African Union. So we need to create a better, fairer world, but it needs to be based on more states. Yes, it can be. Now we have almost 200 states. Why not to have 250 in 10 years, 300 states? But together, it must be with regional integration. So that's my future. That's what I call the Fehlinger doctrine. And that's my answer to the Westphalian system. Thank you.
Yeah, yes. If I can add on something to that, sorry, I'm in a hostel. There are people talking around me. I hope you can't hear them. But well, what's your definition here for like the basis of a nation state? Now, I could understand something like, for example, Catalonia becoming its independent state. But what about like Vojvodina in northern Serbia? There's no basis for like a national state there.
Look, the answer is very simple. In a free federal system like the United States of America or Canada or the European Union or the United Kingdom, there is no reason for independence of Catalonia. That's a luxury debate of our enemies. Why? Because, you know, there is a huge cost in becoming independent in terms of blood and financially and injustice. So that's not justified in the case of Catalonia. Spain has to be federalized, and that's the way for them. In the case of Vojvodina, you know, it's also not justified to go for Vojvodina independence as long as Serbia is not bombing the people in Vojvodina. That's why it was justified in the case of Kosovo, because there was genocide, there was bombing, there was ethnic cleansing, there was massive state organized violence against their own citizens. So obviously intervention was justified, and obviously statehood of Kosovo was justified and is justified and will be for long term, and is also a very good example for how we should do in the future. Because when there is, for example, a case of Chechnya, then of course we should, independent Chechnya should have our support. Yeah, we cannot always cow to the nuclear kind of threat and say, oh, they are part of Russia. Russia is nuclear. We want to make business with Russia, and so we accept it. No, Russia has broken all the rules. Obviously, we must support. And these countries which have a case for independence have some, of course, must also be some economic and political viability. But the most important is the situation of the people there treated by their central government acceptable or not? Yeah? And in case of Chechnya, obviously it's not, and Buratia it's not, and other examples also to mention. So that's always the most important question, and not the question, do they have their own language? Do they have their own national unity case? They will have. If they want to find it, they can define it, because nations are generally built And we're not in the time of some ethnic tribal understanding of nationhood. It's a question of self-definition. And if the Chechenians want to be free, very good. Welcome to the free world, and we should definitely support them.
I think the question of ethnogenesis is a lot more complex than that. But I want to go back to the Fehlinger doctrine, how it relates to the Westphalian system. Now, it seems to me that you're willing to violate this principle of sovereignty so long as you can invoke this R2P, right? This right to protect. But this seems like to be a very big contradiction.
No, I think, it's very logical. I'm a freedom advocate. I'm for the person to be free, the municipality to be free, the people to be free ultimately, and a limited level of violence and intervention. So intervention is only justified in case of complete kind of a horrendous situation. And that was the case in Kosovo, for example. We had to go for that, and we did, and it was justified. Every bomb on Belgrade was justified, and it was, of course, painful for them and for us, but it was also very painful for my fellow Austrians to be bombed by the Americans in 45 and 44. But it was absolutely justified that the Americans carpet bombed Germany and Austria because our grandparents were Nazis, and this is the way Nazism must be defeated. And it was good, and a new world order developed, and also in Kosovo a new Balkan order developed. And that was also very good because all the 7 countries now emerging out of Yugoslavia live much better than ever before. And the people live free, and that's very good. Serbia doesn't like that at the moment. They want to head for another war. They will get bombs again. And I'm the first one to call for that. And then we will discuss the situation of Vojvodina if it's necessary. But I hope that can be avoided because it's huge costs for everybody in blood and money, which must be avoided at several serious costs. Yeah. But in case it's necessary, I have already called for bombs on Belgrade. That's called deterrence. And deterrence is much cheaper when we make it very clear in the beginning that in the case of genocide, we are ready to bomb our enemies and to go to war, because we could have avoided the Ukraine war by going to Moscow in February 22. And if Scholz and Macron would have said, if you cross the demarcation line of 2015, then we will be on the side of Ukraine and we will bomb the hell out of you. And Putin wouldn't have gone, and we would have saved 500,000 people and this whole risk of nuclear escalation. So that's the problem. We have not the kind of belief in our own strength. We have no kind of belief to be really strong and to deter the enemies who are ready to use violence. We must do that again. We did it in the past. We won the Cold War like that. And this is the way I say it also to anybody in Serbia who is crossing the line into Kosovo. You will get the bombs for sure. And so we can avoid war. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I was just in Vojvodina about 2 weeks ago in Novi Sad, and nobody there had any sort of inkling of wanting to separate from mainland Serbia. I mean, it seems to me that I mean, you said that you didn't like the term balkanization, that but it does really feel like that, like the division of these people into these pointless smaller territories without any sort of true basis. But I don't know, maybe we'll just end up rehashing this, so there's no point going further. Uh but oh, here's a question. What was it like when Vucic, the president of Serbia, he said your name, like he called you out? What was that like? Was that surreal?
That was a bit surreal, to be honest, because it was the first time that the national leader, a state president, mentions me in his national kind of press briefing, which was absolutely like an emergency press briefing. The nation had to be convened, yeah, and he was on all television channels of his nation. It was worldwide audience, yeah, and he mentions me, a humble Twitter activist and economist, actually very friendly in principle to Serbia. He mentioned me, and even Gunther Fehlinger wants to bomb us, because it's a bit ridiculous, because my tweets is not exactly a command action order for the US Navy. So nevertheless, he thought it's necessary. He made me a bit more famous. Fine, I can live with that one. But it was showing that he is ultimately quite a ridiculous character. If he wouldn't be so brutal in many aspects, I could even laugh about it. but unfortunately, he has a very dark side with him as well. And he is also very deeply involved in the Milosevic regime, and he is obviously also now in charge since a decade in prime power. He has treated his opposition in Serbia terrible, and he has basically controlled and turned Serbia in an autocracy. And so he thinks that I'm his big enemy. Fine, but he should be much more careful with the Americans, because he has pissed off the Americans last week very hard with this Banska terror attack. And they really have the bombs, and they have the nuclear aircraft carriers, and they have all these military means, and the Americans are ready to use it, and they can use it. And if he's crossing, after the warning of Kirby that he should disperse his artillery and tanks from the Serb-Kosovo border, I, in this case, would take that very seriously, because contrary to me, the Americans have the assets to tackle any kind of aggression, and I think they are very much prepared, and they will. Thanks a lot.
Gunther, you strike me as like a true liberal in the sense of how the term's used in international relations. International institutions, collective action, conflict resolution. I'm just wondering if you have any sort of authors or people that you've read along your way that helps cement your world view.
Look, I'm very much on the line of Madeleine Albright. I mean, she is the quintessential liberal interventionist, and she is perfect over the time, because in Kosovo they have a monument with her, and I always go and make a picture with her, and I always call for Serbia to make a Madeleine Albright monument in Belgrade, and they love that not so much, but that will come one day, and I love her very much. But philosophically, ideologically, I'm economist. My favorite books and my favorite author is Mr. Mises, the famous economist. He has written extensively as well about the international peace order, and how protectionism leads to war, and how a just economic system is essential for world peace. Yeah, and that's what I'm also like. Really, I love his books and I love his philosophy. He's of course from the long time ago, but he is a very, very good economist, and I think he is the one recommendation about trade and peace and trade. This is my book, and I love it.
Nice. Well, I'm more of like a political economy guy myself, so I like Bob Gilpin. Not sure if you've read his work, but from my perspective, there's always going to be times of immense conflict, and that's the point at which new kind of orders need to be set. But at the end of the day, it's still it's still victor's justice, and I guess I just might never see eye to eye with you on some of these things.
Now, Victor's justice. We are not living in the Roman Empire times. Yeah, this argument I don't agree. We have really developed out of the understanding that the First World War was not concluded decently, and it was leading to a lot of painful consequences, and ultimately to World War II. In the end of the Second World War, the American philosophers and political thinkers have really done their very best to create a just and fair world order, not to make a punishment treaty peace, but to create the global governance systems, to rebuild Europe, to reintegrate Germany into the West in 55 and in NATO, and to build a better world order. And please, my friends, we have achieved it. It's really amazing. Of course, the Soviet Union was then turning into a terrible enemy, and they have spread a lot of disasters in the world, and some of the third world fell for this kind of disastrous socialist world order, and they have paid a heavy price by losing another 50 years of prosperity. But most of the world is now free. Most of the world is successful. There's a few countries, like I've mentioned, Russia, Syria, Iran, which are outside of our world order, and partly China now, unfortunately, going rogue as well. But the rest of the world is developing much better, and we have now 105 trillions of worldwide GDP. This is 5 times more than we had at the end of the Cold War 30 years ago. We are in the most successful generation of world history. It's amazing. And the best years are still to come after the defeat of Russia, and which is pending and will come in 2024, and the breakup of Russia. We will enter another 30 years of glorious growth and success, and that will be very good. And that's my worldview in a way. And we are far from any kind of victor's justice. We are basically having a very fair and good world order. We are just a little bit rusty from time to time because our appeasement friends, they want to always have Russia and China hanging everywhere around and give them a lot of power in the UN. And that's why we don't have enough completely achieved a fair world order, because they are blocking it all the time. And then they complain that the world order is not fair because Russia is blocking the reform of the UN all the time. It's such a hypocrisy of Russia to do that, blocking at the one time and then complaining that the reform is not happening. And they do that everywhere. So that's the thing. And without them and without this kind of revenges to Russian blockage, we will reform the UN, the OECD, the World Trade Organization, and we will be very successful in the next 30 years, and global prosperity will rise to unprecedented levels.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily a controversial point, though. I mean, you can go to like John Eikenberry's work. What was his book, like World Order? I mean, there he documents exactly how, the Bretton Woods system and the whole post-war order was essentially just victor's justice. And what made it slightly differently from other, agreements or deals in the past was essentially that the oppressed or whatever, the subjugated, had a bit more buy-in. They had certain perks of like essentially just like liberal things such as more free trade and things of this nature. But at the end of the day, it was still very much victor's justice.
Naja, let's not exaggerate. Of course, America was benefiting enormously from its position after World War II, but they have also defeated Nazism. I mean, it was American power, fiscal technology, and manpower and blood ultimately, which was defeating this authoritarian challenger in the form of Hitler and of the Japanese. And they have done it. Otherwise, we would live under such kind of Nazi world order. That would be really terrible for anybody. And the American world order has won. They have also benefited. But look who is the Americans. They have opened the doors for the rest of the world. Yeah. Since the last 30 years, they have taken another 80 million people or more in America now. America is a kind of global democracy, very successful. Unfortunately, not always wisely led. That's true. If we see the shutdown debate now at the moment ongoing, but nevertheless, the American world order is the fairest and most prosperous world order ever created in the world history, and it will continue to prevail. And we Europeans are very lucky that we are the allies. And I call everybody to join exactly that world order. And the one things I always tweet a lot about improving it. And that's, of course, in a democracy important to have a debate how we still can improve it. But from victor's justice and unfairness, this we are very far away. And it's actually the best institutional framework we have ever built in the world, and it will continue. And this kind of BRICS and Russian challenge will be defeated. And by overcoming, we will reform our systems, and we will have a much, much better world by the defeat of Russia.
All right.
I mean, we could
I'm
keep
sorry,
talking
Spergler,
about.
but I'm being
Okay,
asked by people
I'll
that.
stop.
Hello?
Yeah, Gunther, I see we're coming up around 30 minutes. If you'd like to stay, we have a lot of requests, or if you'd like to leave, because I know you mentioned you had
Yes,
to.
we can continue. It's fine for me.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I have a question. I'm curious what you think of Bukele and El Salvador's adoption of Bitcoin and their sort of idea of decentralization.
Yeah, I'm totally against that. And I think Bitcoin is a kind of hoax. As national currency, I don't like that. And I recommend everybody the following currency policy. If you are in the Americas, yeah, and if you have a free trade agreement with the United States of America, which unfortunately America has a few, then please go and adopt the dollar. If you are in the European Union and in the European continent, or most of the currency the trade is with the European Union, then peg your currency towards the euro, like the West African currency union has done. That's very good policy, and we will ultimately have basically just three big currency in the world, and that's the dollar, the euro, And of course, the Chinese depends on their future, but they're also very powerful. And then, depending on your trade integration with these currency areas, you should fix your currency towards that one. Doesn't matter if you have your own paper currency or not, and if you like to print some papers, yeah. But ultimately, it's the euro, the dollar, and possible the yuan in the future, and that's it in global currency terms. And the Bitcoin and everything else, that's a kind of speculation fancy, and no countries should go in that direction. I really counsel for caution, and I rejected actually what they have done. And I think it's just a bit of a fancy marketing tool, but it's highly risky. And this is not for currencies of states, but this is for private speculation purposes.
All right. Then, if we have time for one last question, that would be your thoughts on the current state of Argentina and the upcoming election, and your thoughts on Javier Milei, possibly, if you have any opinion on that.
Look, I endorsed his candidacy because I liked that he wants to have a dollar back or to introduce the dollar in Argentina. I think he's also quite a liberal economist, which I think as well. But I think what we first of all need in Argentina is to ratify the EU-Mercosur agreement, because Argentina needs to be urgently, and also Brazil, much more integrated in the world economy and in the European economy. Secondly, we need a change in the American policy, trade policy, to also have trade agreements again, because they only have 20. We in the EU have 70. So they really need to change here. And this protectionism is killing the world economy. It's really big danger. And it is always then the periphery, like Argentina. And so they are hurt the worst. And so we need to help them by stabilizing the world economy with these free trade agreements, currency stability. And of course, what we need is to have decent reforms in Argentina. That means the integration of Argentina in the so-called OECD. That's the World Free Market Organization, or market organization of the industrialized countries. Argentina and Brazil should join. And this is basically my recommendation for Argentina. I think, socialism has really brought Argentina down. And I hope that liberalism and decency will be the future. I heard as well he has bizarre views on Ukraine, Russia. We probably have to help these guys and win these debates in formats like this, because unfortunately the Russian propaganda is so strong in Latin America, is so strong in Africa and Asia. How anybody can support a genocidal regime where nobody even in Russia wants to live there? Everybody is leaving, everybody runs away. And, then the people in Argentina say, yeah, Russia, yeah, very good. Who in Argentina would like to go there? Obviously, even for tourism, for trade, and for business, for investments, they want to come to Europe and to America. But then Putin is good. Who can understand that? But it's a mystery. I don't have. My recommendation is this Milli, but I'm not a big expert on Argentinian internal politics. But I can just say, don't vote for nationalists. Don't vote for socialists. Yeah, vote for decent market democratic guys of the center. They can be liberals. They can be social democrats. Yeah, but be decent and don't vote for the extremes. And your vote matters. They bring a real kind of power to a few on the top. And so you have always to be very decent and look what's the core of the man. Is he decent, or the woman who is running a country? Are they corrupt? Yeah? Then don't vote for them, and vote for decent people. And that's my general recommendation also for Argentina.
Amazing, thank you. We'll let up Harjeet. See, he set his hand up. All right, Harjeet, let's hear it.
Hey guys, thank you for the time. I have one observation based on my experience, and then that'll turn into a question, hopefully. So I was born and brought up in India, and then I moved to US, and I have lived in different parts of the world, and I can tell you that almost all of the world except Europe and maybe US is basically a shit show. The conditions in which people live in and the way their governments kind of prosecute their own citizens is just unheard of. Like people who are born in free world, they have no idea. So, so that is one, and I think the onus. I want to talk about India a bit, and I want to kind of take Gunther's kind of input on what he thinks is the future of the continent, subcontinent. So, first of all, before he goes there, I want to lay out certain facts which even he might not be aware and general public might not be aware. There is this general, perception of calling colonization, British colonization, as something bad. I think it has become like pop culture to just call it bad without looking at data what actual British colonization did to the subcontinent. There is no research which proves comprehensively that in nutshell the British colonization was bad. I can tell you based upon my experience and my living there that it has in net been positive for the subcontinent. If British had not come in there and spread their system of how do you democracy, having a police system, having a judicial system, India would have been Middle Ages even till today. Having said that, the fault, the mistake, and what I blame the Britishers for is that is leaving too early. They created this monolith of a centralized setup for the entire subcontinent, which has 39 different nations. And then they left it half baked and transferred the power into the hand of a casteist elite of the subcontinent, which for last 75 years has been persecuting, conducting genocides of all the nationalities that live in subcontinent, especially those who end up questioning the powers that be. So I think there is a moral responsibility per se if you live in the free world to spread your values of goodness, and especially for what was left kind of the way it is. The subcontinent today is still
Yes, I think
colonized.
we should
So
give
my
Gunther some
question,
time to answer, Patrick.
sorry, you want me to stop or?
You can close
Oh,
it
okay, I'll just land
if
it.
you want.
So my question is to Gunther is how is how are people like you, what is the how is and the people that you rub shoulders with, how do they look at the future of India? We sit here colonized by the same setup that you guys created. When are we going to get decolonized?
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's very interesting topic. Everybody who's interested in history, there's a wonderful podcast about India and many things. It's the history of the 20th century. It's on Apple, and it's a wonderful American who tells all the history very, very accurately. I love it. Listen to that. For the future of India, it's like this. Yeah, I was very much in favor of India to replace Russia in the UN Security Council as a veto member, because India has, of course, 10 times more people than Russia and is much more legitimate. I was very much in favor of India and the EU to conclude a free trade agreement, yeah, which we need, and it would be wonderful. I'm very much of India to be a federal state and to reform itself and to be more and better democracy as part of the OECD. That's very good, yeah. Join the West. But unfortunately, Mr. Modi, he is running his country very bizarrely. And I'm really, the more I learn about India, because I've never been there, but I see him dancing with Putin in the war. I see him like buying weapons from Russia. I see him seemingly being involved in political murder in Canada. And I see hundreds of Sikh people, also from the Sikh minority of Khalistan, who are complaining about the terrible conditions in that country. Yeah? And then I say, what's really going on in India? Is it not a big democracy and the wonderful idea of replacing Russia and joining the West? Yeah? And unfortunately, they are doing very bizarre things. And I'm listening to the Indian minister, who is whatever kind of philosopher, but he is not part of the free world and he doesn't want to be. So thank you very much. Such an India we don't need in the UN Security Council. We don't need as a free trade partner. We don't need in the OECD. Yeah? If they want to be some kind of third world leader in BRICS, yeah, okay, let's have fun. We really don't need them. It's not the 19th century of colonial exploitation. It's the world of free trade, yeah, and of the freedom. If they don't want to be part of that, continue their protectionist socialism of the past, yeah, good luck. you know, don't bother us. If you want to be an ally of Russia, go down with Russia. I feel totally legitimate now to support Khalistan independence. I honestly didn't know a thing about it before, but now after the BRICS summit, I support that one. And why not? Let's give a bit of pressure to Mr. Modi. He is not the good guy, the old grandfather of the democratic world, who is some nice person who we need all to support. Yeah, he seems to be a Hindu nationalist, as everybody claims anyhow, and he has a very bizarre views of governance. Yeah, and if this is the future of the democratic world, I think I don't want to be part of that one. Yeah, and so please let's give a little bit of pressure because our values are universal. Democracy is good for everybody. Freedom and markets are good for everybody, also for the Indians. Yeah? If he has another third way to go, good luck, but not with us together. He cannot say, you need you against Russia and China when he, in fact, is allying with Russia and China. So, Mr. Modi, goodbye. Or you choose to join us because we are not joining India. You choose the free world. You can join. You are very heartily welcome, but under the conditions of our membership and not on your conditions. The world will not be a BRICS world. The world will be free and we will be very successful. And India is very much welcome. Or we will discuss with the successor states of India. And there are so many who are ready for independence and we can wonderfully work with all this Khalistan and many other states. There will be hundreds of millions of people living in all of them, and why not? you know, if they are not ready for the reforms and for the democracy, then we can encourage separatism, and we will work with the successor states of India, Mr. Modi. If anybody listens there, don't get too excited. I'm for federal India, of course, for democratic India, but let's debate other scenarios when he is debating BRICS and dancing with Putin during genocidal war. That's my opinion to India.
All right, thank you. All right, Bohunk supremacist, we'll let you up.
Very briefly, if I might say, it sounds like the Fehlinger doctrine, in some ways, it would lead to a very bad situation. I'm sure you've all read Thucydides and what he has to say on the Corcyraean Revolution and how it spread all across the Hellas. I have a feeling that if we started seeing more of the application of the Fehlinger doctrine, we would see a lot of these kind of petty uprisings, and that this would actually increase ethnic conflict.
Yeah, it's always a big risk when you talk about these things that you're then accused of encouraging secessionism, separatism, revolution. And to some extent, I'm doing that, obviously. And so you can excuse me and you accuse me on that one. Fine, I can live with that. Yeah, I always counsel for caution. I don't say, rise up immediately. You will be in jail in India or in Russia, and these things will be very terrible. But we, as the West, have to have a debate how the world should be structured because ultimately the whole war with Russia now, or the Russian war against us, is about the world order. And Putin says it every day. Xi says it every day. So we have to discuss, is there something wrong with our world order or is there something wrong with their world order? And how they can fit in our world order. And if it requires then to recognize the new states out of ex-Russia, it's one scenario, I hope for, but I'm not, it's not decided in no way. But we have done it in the past, and it worked in Yugoslavia in case. And it is a success story now because all the 7 countries, which I know very well because I worked in all of them and I lived in most of them, they are now much better than they ever were. And it worked in the case of the Soviet Union and also in the case of many others in the history. So, of course, advocating new organization of states or the breakup of states and the recognition of new states, it's not something easy. And I've not done it before 2022, but it's Russia, which militarily has ended our world system on the 24th of February 2022 with the intention of breaking our world system. And then we have to discuss, is this really viable state, Russia? Do we really all want to live in such a kind of a condition where not even the Russians want to live in? So I say no to that one, but I counsel with caution. Of course, this is very important debate. We always have to see the transaction costs in blood and treasure of such developments. So I was not advocating that before 2022, but now it's absolutely justified. And you will see next year the first movements of independence in the Russian ex-republics will come, and there will be many, many, many new states out of Russia. And so it's very good to have this debate, to be prepared, because we need to prepare for that scenario. We, of course, don't know what the future will bring, but we need to be prepared. And so it will be less bloody when we are prepared because we have the institutions to help the new states to be better states.
Thank you. All right, we'll let some new people up here. So Bohunk, I'll let you speak, and everyone, just make sure to keep the questions concise and be respectful of the time. So thank you.
All right, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Gunther, for joining us. Wir freuen uns sehr, dass Sie dabei sind. Ja. My question has to do with the role of Turkey within the NATO alliance, and especially vis-a-vis the sort of Russia-Ukraine conflict. So the first part of the question is, what do you make of Turkey kind of pursuing its own foreign policy vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine in the course of this war? They have not acted, obviously, in lockstep with the rest of the Western NATO countries, if you will. So what do you make of that? And secondly, do you think Turkey has any legitimate claim to portions of Crimean territory, given the history of the Crimean Tatar population on the Crimean Peninsula?
Yeah, the second question is easy to answer. No. And I'm actually totally against anything what you can call annexation, Anschluss, or something like this. If anybody has the idea to change the borders in terms of reorganizing states, yeah, I never called for that, and I'm opposing that completely. So I'm against Crimea joining, being annexed to Russia, to Turkey, anything. I always advocate what is possible in changes is the dissolution of empires and new states. That we have the legal international measures and framework to do. We have done it many times in the past in the terms of the Russian Empire, the British Empire, the Portuguese, and all these things, the Turkish Empire, by the way. But none of these countries should then join any other country. No, no, no. They have to be independent, and they can join regional integration mechanisms like the European Union, like the African Union, depending where they lie and where they fit into. That is the future, and that's the answer. For the other thing, and for example, for Crimea, it will join Ukraine. That's my policy, but it's theoretically thinkable for independent Crimea, yes, but for Turkey or for Russia or for anybody else, no. When it comes to Turkey itself, Turkey is a very complicated country. It is our ally. We are lucky. We put it into NATO in 1952 in order to save it from the Soviet Union, together with their historic enemy, Greece. And it worked very well because these two countries had never an open war between each other, because that is the history of 2000 years of warship. So we have done very well in that area in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is so important for world history. So what I think about today, of course, Mr. Erdogan was tempted very much by the last 10 years, where the crazy people in the world have had a really good time because Obama was so lazy president. And since 2013, especially, Erdogan has gone completely rogue. But I think now he has understood it's time to return clean. And he is trying to run his country a bit better and to realign with the West, because he's also seeing how terrible the war is going for Putin. So I'm actually optimist on Turkey. But with Turkey, we have to really realign economically. They have to peg the currency towards the euro. They have to upgrade the customs union and align deeper with the European Union and also inside NATO to return. And there will be also a Turkey after Erdogan, and this should be a very strong ally of the West. And I'm not in favor of EU membership of Turkey currently, because they have many regional difficulties in their foreign policy. But it's also possible in the next 20 years to think in that direction again, if they really align mentally with the EU much more, because it's them joining us, not us joining Turkey. And they have to come into the free world fully. And if they come, they are welcome. And I'm actually always very pro-Turkish in my position, but not on the cost of the Greeks or the Cypriots. There is obviously, they are more for, they are our priority, but good relations with Turkey is absolutely important. As we have seen in the Ukraine war, they were the first one to bring the Bayraktars. They were ready to act. Yeah. The Ukraine was saved in March, very much with the help of Turkey, and I will be eternally grateful for their fast and efficient supply of Turkish drones to Ukraine. And so thanks a lot, Turkey. I'm very happy for that.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
Spergler, go ahead. Spergler can speak if you want.
Sorry, did you say me? Yeah, I just seemed like there was like a bit of a contradiction here in the Fehlinger doctrine. Now, I detected like a hint of Wilsonianism, right? The idea that these smaller, regional regions, that they have some sort of right to self-determination. But I just don't understand why that right to self-determination also precludes them from joining larger nations. I mean, obviously, Crimea is a great example of a place with like a large amount of ethnic Russians. Same for the Donetsk and the Luhansk region in Ukraine. I mean, if we were really applying the Fehlinger doctrine and saying, okay, well, perhaps the Ukrainians were unjustly bombing these areas, especially in eastern Ukraine. Why do they not also have the right of self determination and the right of association with another nation?
No. I don't think anybody has the right of association with any other nation. Yeah, that will be always completely abused and will be a tragic kind of a fallacy, because that you open the Pandora's box for a lot of issues which I completely oppose. But no, I don't think it's inconsistent. I'm for freedom of nations, and that's very logically. And I oppose any Anschluss out of the Austrian context, because there was always this Hitlerian argument of, yeah, no, they are Austrians, they are Germans, and they should join us. And this will be, in many cases, it's the end of small countries. And I think small countries are very important for world peace. And we need regional integration systems like the European Union to help them to have a stable governance framework, but in no way they should be then forced or bullied into joining so-called stronger nations, and that would be a recipe for a complete disaster worldwide if we allow that.
All right. Do we have any questions from OPED, Athenian, or Radio Brut? Does somebody of you want to speak? All right, no. Then I'll give the mic back to Spergler. Spergler, can you speak?
They tried to Fehlinger doctrine me, but I don't go down that easily. You understand? Yes. I mean, I don't have anything else to say. I mean, I think just disagree about the way I conceptualize this. I mean, your logic could also be applied to these international institutions like the EU or any sort of confederation, that they could also potentially gain these interests in abusing, the way in which the map is kind of divvied up. So I don't see exactly how the logic doesn't always apply there as well.
Yeah, we are far from abusing anything. We are actually good people in the European Union. And what we want to do is to promote peace and stability. And anyhow, I'm not a EU official, because the EU is absolutely against encouraging independence of anybody. But I'm, as an individual political thinker, I say we have made many mistakes, like rejecting the Chechenian independence in '94 was a historic mistake, and we should reverse that. And we should, of course, not encourage separatism and secessionism without any reason. But in the case of countries which fight the public good, which not create any kind of acceptable peace order, if internally, externally, or which are really enemies of world peace, like Russia, we have no reason to defend their structural integrity. And if there is independence movements, we certainly should support them. Hello?
Thank you. Okay, we'll let up Tannhauser next. All right, Tannhauser, there you go.
But in
in Russia there has been in the past a sort of a law which allows the husband, which essentially permits domestic abuse. It counts it more so a misdemeanor than an actual crime or offense. Are you familiar with this?
No, but there's a lot of things that are wrong in Russia. Enough reason to promote ex-Russia.
So with regards to this, would you support white polygyny?
I don't know that term.
You don't know?
But I think I don't support it.
Oh, okay.
You know, I'm a mainstream person. I support the European Union regulatory framework and values, and I'm not in anything else.
Very good. Thank you, Tannhäuser. Well, if there is no one else who has to ask questions out of the audience, maybe what do you think about Bukele and El Salvador and the adoption of Bitcoin and their vision of decentralization, Mr. Fehlinger?
And that question, I think I've answered already. I'm against Bitcoin. I have no Bitcoin, and I think it's not a national currency. It should be the euro, the dollar, basically all the countries in the world, in a very simple answer. You know, it's the euro and the dollar for the world. The rest is a mistake.
That's fair enough.
I mean, big economies like India and Indonesia can have their own currency, but ultimately the world dominant currency for the future will be the euro and the dollar, and they have, and everybody else will align to these currencies. And best, if you have the trade integration over 50%, it's best to have a fixed exchange rate with your main currency partner, the dollar or the euro.
All right. I think Sperber has another follow-up.
Yes, I just wonder, like, what you envision exactly of these smaller new statelets that will emerge. I mean, how like integrated into the EU will they have to be? Will they have to be, full free trade, free movements of populations and all that? Because a lot of these places, I don't think they would actually want that.
Yeah, that's always the most important question. What is the wish of that nation? Yeah, that's the most important. If they want to join the EU, they are very welcome. It's so simple. Yeah? That's the question of wish, of will, and then they are welcome. And which nations to be welcoming? I see a future, of course, Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia, the Western Balkans in the European Union. That's why I advocate for 37 countries. The return of the United Kingdom, that will make us 37. That should be all feasible in this decade. And then we have the question of Armenia. It's very possible for the future in the 2040s. And then we will see how the future of ex-Russia will be. I think the European part can definitely join in the long term the European Union as well. The new states emerging from there. I don't think Siberia will be ever in the European Union. But there is also the EU Customs Union, which is our arrangement with Turkey. That's also very feasible. And there are various ways of free trade agreements, political cooperation, strategic partnerships, customs union, which we can offer to emerging new countries. And that's what we should do.
Can I ask one final question? I just want to know, how does the Fehlinger Doctrine, how does it differ from the Morgenthau Plan? For those who don't know, the Morgenthau Plan was the plan to divide up Germany at the end of World War II.
Naja, the Morgenthau Plan was about many other things as well, especially economic underdevelopment. And that was nothing I support. There was a debate also to divide up Germany. And ultimately, Germany was divided, by the way, in 1949 between the Soviet Union and America in two zones, in two states. And that is the reality. It was united only in 1990. So I have nothing to do with the Morgenthau Plan. I didn't think it was a good idea. And for all who are so much into history, this was a period of American withdrawal from Europe, because at the end of the 45, the American troops have almost completely left Europe. And then in this period until 47, basically, there was big starvation in Western Europe, especially in Germany and Austria. And it was a complete crisis. And the Soviets fought, the Americans left, there's economic total crisis, and we can take over the rest of Europe. And that was the plan of Stalin in that years. It was unfortunately so much isolationism back in America that the Americans said, oh, we don't have to care for a new world and for Europe. And we bring our boys home, we don't send money, and we let them basically starve. That was the Morgenthau plan. Yeah? And we just have no reason to come back again. Goodbye, Europe. But, then they saw that the Russians take over Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary in 48, and that they were ready to take over the rest in instances. So it was a very critical period because France, Western Germany, Italy could have easily fallen to the Soviets as well. And then the Soviets would have been at the Atlantic. And America would have maybe had to come back in a big invasion similar to D-Day one day later then. So then they have decided that this is not the way forward, and they have started to rearm Western Germany, to fight the political battle in Italy, to kick out the Communist of France government, and that was all between 1948 and 50. And so then they established NATO, they put the EU, the predecessor organization, together, and then Western Europe was saved under American protectorate, which is NATO basically in that years. And so we are free and prosperous, and it worked very well because we became very rich, and not as rich as America, but relatively. And that is the story of the history of Western European integration. What I wanted to say now, sorry. But that's basically the summary of American power. Yes, and then Morgenthau has nothing to do with me. I'm totally against it because I'm for equality between America and Europe. I'm for the European Union to join NATO, and I'm for the European Union to be an equal partner of the United States and for a very strong partnership between the EU and the US. Sorry. That's my
Popet, take it away.
philosophy. That's my answer for Morgenthau, Fehlinger doctrine.
Yeah. All right, Popet, take it away. Popet, can you hear us? Can you speak?
Hey, Gunther, just want to say a big fan, longtime fan. It's good to hear your
Thanks
voice
a
and
lot.
your kind of Teutonic charisma. Very much appreciated. The question
Sorry
is,
for
a
my
very
English.
staunch anti-communist as you are, I'm curious, do you think the kind of McCarthy Red Scare and the clampdown in the U.S., do you think this was justified? I'm very curious to hear your opinion.
Look, it's a very unpopular thing to say, but in principle it was justified. Because why? Because America was first an enemy of the Soviet Union, because America was very critical towards the Soviet Union in the 1920s. Justified so,
Are you
because
speaking,
it was a
Gunther? I
completely
can't hear you.
murderous... Hi?
We can hear you.
Gunther speaking. It must be on
Wait.
your end,
Let
Popa.
me exit out and come back. I really want to hear the response because I couldn't hear any of that.
You understand? You hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. You just continue.
So basically, America was a very anti-Soviet in the 1920s. Yeah, immediately, the sentiment of America was very anti-German in World War One, and immediately then swifted to be anti-Soviet. Yeah, and that hasn't changed until the 1930s. And it was, of course, very anti-Soviet Union, also because the Soviet Union made this pact with Hitler. They invaded Finland. America was in full solidarity with Finland. And then suddenly, with the invasion of Hitler in 41, of course, the shift had to change. And then it was Uncle Joe and the necessity to work with the Soviet Union and to portray the Soviet Union as a positive thing towards their own population, because America spent more than 1 trillion in today's dollar to keep the Soviet Union in the fight and make sure they win. Because without that 1 trillion of logistical material supply, technology support, the Soviet Union would have lost. And Stalin was always having Roosevelt at the polls. If you don't send enough, I make separate peace with Nazi Germany. And of course, this was very concrete threat all the time in 41, 42, especially 42. And so the Americans gave what they could. Yeah? And then suddenly, at the end of the war, when the Nazis were defeated and the Japanese were defeated, suddenly Stalin wanted to have everything in Europe. And of course, he had to be stopped. Yeah? And suddenly you had to explain then that the population that the good Uncle Joe is the enemy again. And so it was very difficult to explain, and there were a lot of people who didn't believe that. And so such a kind of a McCarthy style purge was probably necessary ultimately, as when it's not popular, but the Soviets really wanted to take all the power in Europe and in the world. They took China, they wanted Korea, they wanted Japan, and they wanted all of Europe. And so basically, some people couldn't get the change. They really worked continuously, reasonable with the Soviets. And of course, McCarthyism went much too far, and there was a lot of abuses then. But in principle, such political turnaround like 49 and 50 was necessary in America, had to be accompanied also by some kind of chasing of communist spies. And so it was justified, but it was unfortunately probably then later also going in the extremes. So I'm not a McCarthy fan, but such kind of purges are politically also necessary when it comes to big geostrategic realignments, which you have then to implement as well. And so ultimately that was a necessary period in American policy.
All right. So, what are your thoughts on the rising tensions in Africa, like the detainment of journalists being tortured, the intelligence services rising there? What do you think the future holds for Africa?
I'm a big optimist for Africa, and many countries have tremendously developed in the last 20 years when they joined the free world. There are places like Kenya, Tanzania, and also partly Egypt, yeah, Morocco. These are much better than they ever were. But of course, we have also negative examples like Eritrea, Somalia, and others, and Ethiopia. I hope they will join the democratic free world. And I think the African Union is something America and Europe should actively support. It would help to get them into the Security Council. It was good to get them into the G20 at the last summit. And I'm very positive about regional economic integration. They have made the Central African Free Trade Agreement last year. It's ratified and enforced. Very good. And expect more good news for Africa in the coming years. And the less Wagner soldiers there, the better for the continent. And with the defeat of Russia now, also the nefarious influence of Russia in Africa will disappear, and there will be much better Africa emerging out of that.
All right. Another question from Bohang. Bohang, can you speak?
Yes, Gunther. My question here is about Austria's accession to NATO. Do you
Yes?
think that Austria, before it accedes to NATO, do you think there must be more de-Russification of Austria? And what I mean by that is the American media doesn't cover the little Alpenrepublik very often, but every time I do read about it, and especially when I read about it in German media, it seems like Austria is always dealing with some kind of corruption scandal. And it does seem that the Russians have a lot of influence in Vienna. I'm also thinking of the relationship between Raiffeisenbank and Russia and so forth. So do you think more of these sort of Russian collaborators in Austria should be a precondition of Austria's NATO accession should be their removal or their detainment? What do you think about this?
You know, this is a very big problem, obviously, because Austria was a Cold War border country and we were neutral and we were like the meeting space for the Russian diplomats and spies. And we were like we have a law still which allows all the spies to roam freely and unpunished in Austria. And we have also the first place where the gas pipeline has entered free Europe. And so a lot of money was laundered in Vienna. And these structures don't go away easily. And Mr. Putin, he loves Austria. He loves Austria, and he loves to put a lot of his money in Austria, and his oligarchs know that, and also Deripaska and Firtasch, they dance in Vienna and invest in a lot of things, and that's a big problem. But I don't think it should be an obstacle to NATO membership, because the process of NATO membership, the clearing of our security structures, the clearing of our defense structures, will be a part of the accession process. And NATO membership is not, you have to be perfect to be in, but you're just in and you will be perfect by going inside.
And, it's even that not a guarantee, because you see in the case of Hungary that you can also go in the other direction inside. But it helps a lot, because you will be, of course, reformed during the accession process, and that's something wonderful to achieve. So I'm very much in favor of NATO membership of Austria, and please support it wherever you are and let us join, and it will be much better, obviously.
Great, thank you. All right, we'll see who else we can get on.
I don't know. Do you want to speak?
Iron, if you'd like to speak, you can speak.
I hear you very well.
Iron Age agriculturist. You can speak if you want.
Indeed, thank you. And firstly, vielen Dank, Gunther. Thank you for sharing your time with us today.
You're welcome.
Danke. I just wanted to ask, in regards to this sort of concept that you have regarding sort of the expansion of NATO and Europe, and sort of conglomerating these sort of small powers together to act as a bulwark against, if I've got you correct, like imperial powers, and wanting to create like a bulwark against expansionist intentions like what Russia is demonstrating in the east. When we see what happened in 2008 with Georgia, where Abkhazia and South Ossetia were sort of cleaved away from Georgia using the pretense of, minorities or breakaway regions against what would have been a European ally at the time. And now with Armenia obviously wanting a closer relationship with Europe, and Armenia has had to abandon its brothers in Nagorno-Karabakh, with promises from Europe, and the Azerbaijanis have essentially reabsorbed that territory into their country. I hate to say it, but it doesn't sound like these countries can place a lot of faith in the European project and NATO per se, or am I misunderstanding something according to your doctrine?
Look, that's a very important question, sir. But we should have maybe just integrated Georgia without these territories, because they were, especially in the case of South Ossetia, not South Ossetia, but the other region,
Abkhazia.
Abkhazia. Yeah, exactly, Abkhazia. These were never integrated in Georgia until they were breaking away already in '91, and these are breakaway republics from the time of the Soviet Union breakup wars, and our ability to reintegrate was never given. So for these countries, I have always advocated a membership into Ukraine, into NATO, similar like Western Germany. So without these breakaway republics. And if we would have, in the Bucharest summit, made it very clear that they can join, but not with this Abkhazia, that would have been the much fairer way, because the rest was a bit delusionary. So we always have to look very clearly on the facts on the ground. Otherwise, we enter some delusionary debate, and then we create wars which we actually don't want to create, and which are very unfortunate. So Georgia should have joined without Abkhazia in NATO in 2008, and that would have been perfect, and it would have been really avoiding all this 15 years of crisis, because that would be the logical way. But then there was a lack of information, and the Georgians, of course, insisted on Abkhazia. But it's not the Georgians making the foreign policy for us, but America should make their own foreign policy for the free world, and then it would have been working much better. But unfortunately, there's always a lack of information. And then we have a bad policy, and we have 15 years of war as a result of our underinformed policy towards Eastern Europe. Yes?
Yes, perfect. I think we have a question from Sven.
Please, welcome.
Glenn, go ahead. Can you talk?
Yes, please talk.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you very well.
Okay,
Brilliant.
hello, Gunther. I have a more simple question for you. We've noticed you're always smiling and giving a thumbs up. We love it. I was wondering, what's the key to being such a joyous man?
No, I'm clean with my conscience and I'm happy to promote optimism. I think it's also an obligation, which Mr. Popper, my favorite philosopher, he has said that optimism is the duty of every educated person. And so I try to also actively promote happiness and optimism in my public profile. And I'm actually very happy and public, so very optimistic person. And in generally, as I've said, the last 30 years were extremely good for the free world, and more to come.
That's
Thanks a lot for the question, by the way.
that's beautiful. That's
Great.
beautiful. What about Austrian wine? Does that play a role?
I had too much in the summer, and I'm not drinking. I stopped drinking now in September. But I enjoy Austrian wine and beer, and visit Austria. It's a beautiful country.
I
Wonderful.
heard like three days ago there was a burglary in the Weinberg in Vienna. You're not affiliated with that. You don't know what happened there, Mr. Fehlinger.
It's a beautiful place, and nice people, and we are friendly to the world. Just we are neutral, and that's something we have to change. But the rest is perfect here.
All right, let's give the mic one more time to Spergler. Go ahead, Spergler.
Yes, Gunther.
Everybody welcome.
Gunther, do you
Yes.
have any thoughts on Dugin, Alexander Dugin in Russia?
No, he is a complete disaster. He is a fascist philosopher, whatever. You shouldn't use that word for that one. But we had many of them in Germany as well.
Okay, we'll
Dangerous
get a
element.
question.
Sorry?
Oh, you just cut out for a second. Yes.
That's my opinion of Dugin. It's a very bad person.
Fair enough. Any more questions from the audience? Pulpit. No one?
Okay, we'll let up Julian. He was asking for a while. Julian, you're good.
Following your content for a long time. I wanted to ask you a question. AfD are now polling very high in Germany. If AfD ever come into the government, will it be time for ex-Germany? Thank you.
On a more serious note, it's like this. The more Ukraine is successful on the battlefield, which it is, the more it makes sense for Russia to fool a lot of money into Western politics and create a big crisis. So what is Russia doing? They spend a lot of money in Austria, in Germany, or tonight you see also on the American side, this whole shutdown debate is fooled by Russian money. It's enormous Russian money. So you can expect a lot of that because Russia is basically fighting a war against us, and they are fighting it with all possible means, also with political means, also with public with funding of political parties. And the rise of AfD would have been impossible without Russian money, and that's a fact. Yeah. So what it comes ex-Germany, obviously I'm not in favor. Germany is a democratic market economy, a member of the European Union, and it's a very good country. It has a 4 trillion economy, and of course German federalism can be discussed, but it's much more federal country. And actually what you see now, that France is going in that direction, because in France we have a big debate about federalization, more right for Corsica and for Bretagne and all these countries. So federalism is the answer for democracies towards the need to have better governance. That's working, and that's what we will do. And that's exactly how we will perceive it. And no ex-Germany. That's the short answer.
Great, thank you for that. Let's see who else we can get up here. All right, here we go.
I'm ready for all questions.
Well, let's get a Iron Age agriculturist in here again. I'll add him. Iron Age, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, gentlemen. Yes, Gunther, if I could ask a second question, because obviously you were just mentioning Austria before, and I've actually been to Austria. I think it's a beautiful country. Ich liebe
Thanks.
Salzburg.
Thanks.
It's
It's very beautiful, actually. I think as well.
It is. I spent a week there and it wasn't nearly long enough. But I wanted to ask a question about the domestic politics in Austria. Obviously, Julian was just here and he asked a question about like if the AfD achieved power in Germany, is there a political force or is there like a political feeling in Austria that is similar to the AfD but in Austria? Because I have
Yes.
never heard of anything, but I wasn't sure.
No, we have the same Russian political project like AfD. We have the one it's called FPÖ, and they are even more successful. And they are falling into this neutrality feeling, and they are funded by the Russians, and they are pretty successful. The opinion polls put them at 30%, and that's a big tragedy. But they will not really get full power because they are a very corrupt party, and they will not be successful. I'm quite confident in terms of gaining political power, but they are really quite strong in the opinion polls at the moment.
If I can just ask, are
Yes.
they more popular like in the countryside amongst rural folk, or do they have a following like in the cities among certain like classes of people in the urban areas?
No, in general, there's a left-right divide in Austria because you generally have a more conservative vote in the west of Austria, and the city is more left-wing, the Vienna, because we have a very big city with a traditional left-wing voting bloc. Yeah. But in the recent years, the rise of the populists, they have basically a little bit changed it, and they have a good following, especially under disinfected people, and a lot of people now in the economic crisis as a result of the Russian war. There is a lot of people disinfected and unhappy, and they vote for that party, and they are quite active also on these anti-corona measures, and that's a platform, a populist platform, which attracts some parts of the lesser educated population, and basically it's an educational divide. I think nobody really of the higher educated classes is voting for them, but a lot of people of the lower educated classes vote for the FPÖ. Yeah, that's the truth.
Alles gut. Dankeschön, Gunther, for your answers, and thank you for your
You are
time.
welcome. You're welcome.
I'll jump off now. Thank you.
All right, we'll let Heinrich speak next. Let's hear it.
Is it my turn to ask a question?
Yes,
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
good.
go ahead.
Alrighty. I can hear me. The sound very loud out there.
I think we have difficulties.
Heinrich, we can't hear you.
I can hear
We
you.
can't
I
hear you
can hear
well,
you very
Heinrich.
well.
Okay,
Okay.
I have a question. That was very interesting. You brought up the Russian sort of infiltration of a lot of these populist parties, because I've always heard that Russia sponsors a lot of sort of left wing parties in Germany. Now, I'm not an expert or anything, but I've heard that De Linke or De Link or however you pronounce it, right? I'm a Yank. Often still like collaborates with like an old apparatus that still kind of exists from the days of East Germany. And I was going to ask you if you think that Russia, through forming BRICS and befriending a lot of nations, is intending to weaponize like mass refugee migration sort of crises, and if there can be like an anti sort of migration party that's also pro EU, pro NATO.
Yes, you have to understand one thing. Russia is not an ideological power. They don't care if you left, right, center, green, or yellow. They want to support whatever fits their interests. Yeah. So they are very happy to work with the mainstream parties as long as they do what Russia wants. Their real ambition is to influence policy. In the cases they can go by tanks, like in Ukraine, they do that. Otherwise, they go by money or by energy. But of course, you have limits with energy policy, and then you fill in basically with money. And they go according to the internal fissure lines and frictions of the West, yeah, or of BRICS or anybody. They fool the sentiment that is there. They don't invent Trump in a sense. But they see that America is a divided country between left and right, so they fool these dynamics, yeah, with money, with media attention, and that's the strategy everywhere. They see that India feels oppressed by the rest of the world and exploited, so they feel the tension and they fund the tension and they put their media power into that one and they put their money in that one. So we always think, Russia must be left and they support the left, or Russia is supporting the populists because they love the policy of the populists. No, they only support the AfD or the FPÖ because the mainstream politicians don't subjugate to them. They would be much more happy to support the mainstream parties and to have the policy immediately of subjugation. But that's basically the complexity of that one, because we think that Russia must have an ideological strategy. But no, they just want to tackle us, to hurt us, and look for the friction lines, the fault lines in the debate, and then they put strategically clever their efforts into these existing fault lines in our societies, from India to the US to Europe, and then they exploit these internal tensions which are there in all democracies, and they are expert for that one, and they have money for that, and they have media power. They have also invitations or gas contracts or business promises, and that's a kind of a longer list of tools which they use according to what works. And they have in Germany, if you're from Germany, for example, they have supported the left because the left worked for them. And that was fine. Now the left is in a crisis. Now they shift the support to the right. Because ultimately it doesn't matter. It's not an ideological struggle. It's a kind of struggle to do whatever hurts their enemies, and that's us. And so they work effectively according to that strategy. And they do that since 200 years. They have used money to influence French policy in the 19th century extensively, and they do it now. And that's simply our naivete, because we always think, that's conspirational. No, that's just the fact of the policy which they always use, and that's what they continue to use, and that's why they are quite effective, and that's why we have to work for the dismantlement of Russia. Because as long as they have so much excess profits in the energy business, basically, or in the mineral export, they can always use that excess profit which they deprive their population from. Because normal countries, democracies, would use the funds which they have from the natural resources to build streets and to build a welfare system in Russia. But as it is an autocracy, they can use this excess funding for making nonsense political projects in Austria, of all places, or in Germany, or fund the GOP and all these things they are doing. Yes.
Could I ask one more question?
Please, yeah.
So during the, I'm sure you're familiar, but in the same way that Russia was, or I guess the Soviet Union was known for like sponsoring like guerrilla groups in Africa and in Central America, and I think they even had like operations in India and in Indonesia. Do you believe that they see a possible way of destabilization? Because I don't think you answered this when I asked the question before of like weaponizing mass migration, like what Lukashenko had.
I lost the contact now.
I was at
Hi.
if
No, I understand it. Mass migration. Of course, the tools Russia uses are always different, and because they are very smart. We don't have to think of them like dumb people. Yeah, they are very smart. They see what works. Yeah, does propaganda work? Do we need a civil war? Do we need some military intervention? Do we need money? Do we, for example, the migration crisis you're mentioning? The best example is the Polish-Belarusian migration crisis, which was completely invented in 2020, 21. That was artificially marketed in Iraq, that you can go via Minsk to Europe and then over to the Polish border. And they created that as a political project. Of course, the Syrian civil war was not an invention of Russia, but the carpet bombing of the northern Syrian cities, which led to this massive migration crisis in 2015, was of course an artificial intended policy. They put all these bombs on North Syria. The Syrians ran to Turkey, and of course they left then to Europe, and that was artificially created. And similar, they do it in Libya, and that's one tool in the policy mix of Russia to undermine Western unity, to shake our democratic resolve, to create right-wing parties, and that's one of their policy tools.
Thank you very much.
You're
Great.
welcome.
Nice.
We have one question from the underground facility. People want to know what made you take this strong interest in politics and foreign affairs, considering your background as an economist, and maybe what message do you have for the youth to make a change?
Look, it's like this. I was a youth activist in my 90s, in the 1990s, when I was in my 20s. And it was wonderful world because communism was ended and all these occupation regimes left. And I went to all the countries in Eastern Europe. And my 90s, this was really wonderful. I was a student leader and I loved it. And I did a lot of politics. Later, I was then also helping with EU enlargement from the European Parliament. And it was wonderful. I saw all these countries in the 90s, and now they are very rich countries like Poland, Slovakia, Romania. I go there now, 20 years later, and I'm surprised myself about the success of our policies and these opportunities. And Bucharest is very dynamic, a rich city now. The same true for Warsaw, and it's really fantastic. So what makes me so active? Because I was working as a development consultant in the transformation of Kosovo and Ukraine, and I saw when we don't give them the chance to join, we have a big crisis and it's not working. Just economics alone is not creating prosperity. You need also the big things like NATO membership and the EU. And in the framework of the confrontation with Russia and Ukraine, I decided then in 2018 to be more active on a public profile and join Twitter and YouTube. And gradually I improved the profile, and I'm motivated because I want to have a better, secure world. I see the young people of Kosovo, they are now free, and they tell me the story of their childhood when they were suppressed and tortured by Serb soldiers and policemen in the 90s. And yeah, it motivates me to fight for a free and secure world. And I see in Ukraine, when I lived, a lot of young people in uniform, they have to fight. Why? Because of freedom and because Russia is attacking them, and I do this political fight to help them and to ensure a secure world order. And that's what I want to do. And that's why I'm motivated, and I call everybody to be active in policy, in public policy. Don't let the public policy to the politicians. Tweet your opinions, have strong views, and respect each other online, obviously. But let's work together and let's achieve this new level of security, which is the basis of prosperity, and create an open and better world order. And this is what we can offer. And that's what I will do.
Amazing. All right,
Well,
Gunther, I
thank
have a
you.
question. So I know that, of course, Russia is a source of energy for much of the world. What are your thoughts on energy if it's not coming from Russia?
Look, what we have to do is, of course, produce our energy ourselves. We have to see what kind of resources we have. We have water, solar, wind, but we also need to use coal, but on European technology levels and European environmental standards. So nothing, coal or nuclear or gas is not the enemy per se, but we need to upgrade the technology with which we use it. We must produce and burn it cleaner, and when we can, we should shift completely to electric energy. For example, in mobility, we can do that. We have the technology now to shift towards e-mobility. So let's really end carbon in the sector of mobility. But we need gas, we need nuclear, we need also coal to burn for the energy generation if we don't want to buy it from Russia. And we have then to use that on European safety standards, on European environmental standards of air, water, clean. And always think what we always say, that Russia is bringing us cheap energy. But imagine to what costs for the Siberian and world climate, because they work on Russian standards, even that standards they don't keep. So that's really very dirty stuff what they are doing. And we will, after the fall of Russia, have to clean up the Siberia from the Soviet and Russian environmental crimes, and it will be very costly. And then I call everybody, guys, you told us it is very cheap to buy things from Russia, but it's similar like with Chernobyl. They have produced a lot of nuclear power, but at very terrible standards. And our things work in generally because we have very high security standards and have very high environmental standards. And we shouldn't bedevil any kind. Gas is not guilty, coal is not guilty, nuclear is not guilty. It's the way we have to do it. And we in Europe, in normally, and the US, under free market world condition, we normally do things regulated. We have all the policy stakeholders making input in the regulation, and then normally comes out a good result. And based on that one, we can be in a way neutral on energy sources, but we have to use it responsible and decently for the environment and for us. So I'm for all energy sources, and we should simply not buy from our enemies, because that's a very stupid thing to do. That we send money we fund authoritarian regimes in the world simply because we are too lazy for the energy transition. That's my biggest point, actually, because it's a very stupid thing to do, because the whole of the Russian miracle of the last 10 years, let's say, of Putin's rise to power, the whole army he has now in Ukraine is all the result of our petrol dollars moved over to Russia because we somehow needed gas for transition purposes, or we don't like nuclear power. And then we take the money from a person like Putin and we fund his regime, which is a complete disaster. The same is true for Iran and Saudi Arabia and other countries. I think that's something we should really be a little bit more strategic and not to be ideologically, I love nuclear, I love solar, I love wind, I love coal, I love gas or not. Yeah, that's all a question how you do it. It's not an ideological question, nuclear or gas. It's a question of technology and standards and responsibility. But what is really an ideological question is if we, as consumers and as state and policymakers, should give all these billions and billions, 300 billions every year we sent until last year from European consumers to Russia to have Mr. Putin, the richest man in the world, supposedly with 200 billion of private controlled assets. I mean, this is completely crazy, and I'm happy it's stopping now, but we should have stopped it already some years ago.
Great, thank you. Do we have time for a few more questions, or would you like to wrap up?
As you wish. I'm going to an evening event now in Vienna here. So if you have some more questions, I don't want to cut it. I'm already available in the future as well for everybody who invites me from your team. But
amazing. Yeah.
I have to go to some evening event now.
Yes, perfect. Well, we just like to thank you for volunteering your time, and just thank you everyone for joining the discussion. We had some good questions, and again, Gunther, we'd be welcome to host this again if you'd like to speak or have any questions or anything more. So
we can do it during the week one day, because now it's Saturday evening and I have to go to drink some Austrian wine. And
yes,
I have to dismantle some Austrian wine now.
Yeah, X wine.
X wine, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Again, thank you, Gunther. We really do appreciate it. And everybody, if you're interested in hearing more, this is the underground facility we'll be hosting from here. So it's at UG facility, and we'll be posting this on YouTube and doing more on Twitter. So thank you again, Gunther. We appreciate it, and thank you everyone for joining us.
You are very welcome. Looking forward.
Have a good one. Enjoy the wine.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Prost.
All the best. Bye. Thanks.